Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us, what city are you watching from? Music echoed vibrantly in the wedding hall of the Grand Marlowe Hotel, where dazzling crystal lights reflected off sparkling glasses. Outside, a fine drizzle fell, but inside was a world of splendor. Radiant smiles, heartfelt toasts, and the clinking of glasses blending into a symphony of luxury. Clara stood still at the entrance, her hand unconsciously tightening around the strap of her small purse. The navy blue dress she wore wasn't a designer gown like before, but a neatly rented one. It was just elegant enough not to look out of place, yet it could never compare to the branded dresses gliding past her. She had chosen it not only because of the cost, but also because Clara no longer wanted to flaunt herself as she once did. Still, the looks from those around her made her chest tighten. "Isn't that Clara? Andrew's ex-girlfriend?" "Yeah, I heard her family went bankrupt a few years back. From a rich heiress to this." The whispers were muffled by the music, but Clara heard every word, each one pricking her skin like a needle. Andrew, the groom today, had once been her great love. They had sworn to be together, painted their future side by side. But when her family lost everything in the bankruptcy, Andrew walked away, leaving her stranded at the edge of the abyss. Now there he was, standing on a stage in a pristine white tuxedo, holding hands with a bride who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a magazine. And Clara, just a guest, misplaced and unnecessary. She hadn't come to this wedding to reclaim what was lost, but to prove to herself she had the courage to face it. Yet now, as eyes turned toward her, laced with pity and curiosity, Clara wanted nothing more than to run. She lifted her purse and turned to leave. "Maybe it's fate we met again." The deep, familiar voice came from right behind her, making Clara freeze. Slowly she turned her head, and her heart clenched when her eyes met the cold gray gaze fixed on her. Peter Knight, her greatest rival in the business world, the man Clara had poured all her hatred into for years. CEO of Knight Group, the powerful real estate empire, the very man who had triumphed in that brutal deal years ago, driving her family's company to the brink of ruin. What was he doing here? "What are you doing here?" Clara gripped her purse tighter, her voice icy. Peter shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "This is the wedding of a major partner. Of course, I had to attend." Before Clara could respond, he stepped closer and casually pulled her hand off the purse strap. "And if I'm not mistaken, you were just about to slip out." Clara stiffened, raising her chin to meet his eyes. "So what?" "It's none of your business." "It is my business." Peter lowered his voice so only she could hear. "If you leave now, everyone will think you couldn't handle it." "Do you really want them to believe you're a failure?" The question struck Clara silent. She truly didn't want to be a laughingstock, but was she supposed to let Peter, her sworn enemy, be the one to save her? "Let go of me," she hissed, but he only smiled. "No, tonight I'll play your companion. Think of it as one of my rare good deeds." With that, he clasped her hand firmly and led her straight into the hall. At once, every gaze turned toward them. But this time, instead of pity, there was surprise and a buzz of speculation. "Look, it's Peter Knight." "Oh my God, he came with Clara. I thought they were enemies. Why do they look like a couple?" Clara bit her lip, forcing a stiff smile to keep her dignity. She hated Peter's shamelessness, and even more, she hated the fact that he was actually doing the right thing for her. "What are you playing at?" she muttered, trying to keep her composure. Peter raised his glass, lightly clinking it against hers, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Just a little act. Trust me, you look stunning when you're not the one running away." Clara's heart wavered. Part of her was quietly grateful, part of her seething with anger so sharp she couldn't speak. He was the man who had pushed her into the darkness, and now he was the one pulling her into the light. How cruelly ironic. When Andrew and the bride walked past, the groom's gaze flickered. Seeing Clara arm in arm with Peter, Andrew's brow furrowed before he quickly forced a smile. In that moment, Clara realized Peter had just given her something more precious than any gift. Pride. But that pride came from the very man she had sworn never to forgive. Clara tightened her hand inside his, torn between pulling away and holding on. An unwilling hero, a sworn rival, a man who stirred her heart even as her mind screamed to reject him. And Clara knew from that moment on, fate had opened a brand new game. The music in the wedding hall shifted into a soft jazz number, the saxophone mingling with the delicate clink of crystal glasses. Clara still hadn't recovered from the shock of Peter boldly holding her hand and pulling her back inside. But he was different. Confident posture, a half smile, as though standing next to her was the most natural thing in the world. Peter refilled Clara's glass and handed it to her smoothly, his cold gray eyes following her every small movement. That simple gesture drew even more curious glances from the crowd. "You're making people misunderstand," Clara muttered, keeping a polite smile on her lips for the guests watching them. "Sometimes misunderstandings can be useful." Peter raised his glass and lightly tapped it against hers. "At least you're no longer the girl standing awkwardly alone." Clara stayed silent, her heart in turmoil. He wasn't wrong. Since Peter's appearance, the pitying looks had disappeared, replaced by surprise and even admiration. In the eyes of everyone, she was no longer the pitiful ex-girlfriend, but the kind of woman who could capture the attention of Peter Knight, the powerful, aloof CEO. The relief of being spared humiliation washed over her for a moment, but it was quickly followed by anger. Why did it have to be him, the very man who destroyed her family's company, who was giving her a shield tonight? Peter leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "You'd better get used to people seeing us as a pair." Clara startled, whipping her head around to glare at him. "Don't be ridiculous." He chuckled softly, his warm laugh at odds with the depth in his gaze that unsettled her. "Fine. Consider me just an unwilling actor, but you have to admit, I play the role well." Clara was left speechless. He wasn't lying. He played the part so smoothly, so naturally that if she hadn't known better, she could almost believe she truly was his girlfriend. While Peter mingled with a few businessmen, Clara stepped back, memories flooding her. 3 years ago, her family had run a respectable, mid-sized real estate firm in the city. She had been the golden daughter, bright, passionate, expected to carry on her father's legacy. 3 years ago, her family bet everything on a major investment deal. But overnight, Peter's Knight Group struck a crushing blow, seizing the entire project. Her father's company collapsed, he fell ill from the shock, and her mother was forced to sell their mansion to pay debts. To Clara, the name Peter Knight became synonymous with mortal enemy, the man who destroyed her family. From a pampered heiress, she plummeted into ruin. But instead of surrendering, she chose to start over. With no fortune left, she gathered a small pool of capital and a few loyal friends to found a modest consulting and real estate brokerage firm focusing on green, sustainable projects, the kind she believed represented the future. Every dollar had to be carefully weighed. Every project was a battle. Clara had burned out countless times but held her ground. She was determined to prove she was not a failed heiress, but a capable leader. Peter, on the other hand, had soared. After his victory, Knight Group rose to become a major industry player. The media praised him as the young fox, a new symbol of power. To Clara, he was the embodiment of cold ambition, a man who cared only for profit and power. Back in the present, Clara found herself still standing beside him under the glittering lights. Peter leaned closer and asked quietly, "Do you regret coming here?" The question caught her off guard. Regret, of course, but if she hadn't come, she would always be the one running away. "No," her answer was firm. "I don't run." Peter studied her, then nodded faintly, as though he'd expected nothing less. As the night drew to a close, guests began to drift away in small groups. Clara stood on the veranda, the chill air making her shoulders tremble. Suddenly, a warm suit jacket settled across them. She turned to find those gray eyes watching her. "Don't get the wrong idea," Peter said in his low voice. "I'm not gallant. I just hate seeing you shivering like that." Clara pressed her lips together, ready to shrug the jacket off, but her hand unconsciously clutched it tighter. That warmth unsettled her more than the cold had. "What do you want, Peter?" He was silent for a few seconds before replying softly. "Nothing. Just Tonight, I thought, you didn't deserve those pitying looks. Clara was stunned. Hearing those words from the man she'd always considered her enemy shook her. But reason snapped her back. She answered coldly, I don't need your pity. Peter smirked faintly and withdrew his hand. Then think of it as me overacting my role. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of sandalwood. Clara stood frozen, her hand tightening around the jacket on her shoulders. In that fleeting moment, she realized Peter's gaze hadn't been entirely cold. There was something different, a glimmer hidden beneath the ice. It unsettled Clara, and she hated herself for noticing it. On Monday morning, Clara sat in her small office, holding a cup of black coffee she had no desire to drink. The office had only 4 employees, a few green plants to filter the air, and a whiteboard crowded with notes. No luxury, no grandeur, but it was the place where she had poured all her faith after her family's collapse. A knock sounded, and Hannah, Clara's best friend and assistant, walked in, a stack of documents in her hands. Have you heard the news? Hannah asked, her voice tinged with excitement. The government just announced the bidding for the South Bay Coastal Resort Project. Word is it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Clara's head snapped up. South Bay? That land has been under discussion for years. They finally decided to move forward? Hannah nodded. Yeah. This time they're seeking a sustainable development plan that resonates with the local community. If our company can get a foot in the door, this could be huge. Clara leaned back in her chair, heart racing. This was the very opportunity she had been waiting for, a project big enough to put her small firm in the spotlight. But the hope lasted only seconds before Hannah sighed, her tone dropping. There's one more thing. Knight Group is in too. The room went so silent that Clara could hear the clock ticking on the wall. That name, Knight Group, always sent a chill through her, and behind it, of course, was Peter. She let out a bitter laugh. Of course, a fat prize like this? They wouldn't miss it. Hannah eyed her with concern. Clara, I know you're eager to prove yourself, but South Bay, isn't it too much? Knight Group has the capital and the connections. Are you sure you want to go head-to-head with Peter? Clara stayed quiet for a long moment. Painful memories surged back. Her family's company collapsing, her father's illness, her mother forced to sell their home. The image of Peter walking out of that boardroom years ago, cold-eyed and victorious. Scars that never faded. Precisely because it's Peter, Clara said firmly, lifting her head. I have to enter. Not just for the company, but for myself. I need to prove I'm no longer the loser. Hannah sighed but nodded faintly. She knew once Clara decided, nothing could change her mind. In the days that followed, Clara threw herself into work. With her small team, she drafted a detailed proposal, an eco-friendly resort powered by renewable energy, working with local fishermen to preserve the coastal heritage. She stayed up countless nights, her fingers aching from typing and redrawing plans, but her eyes still burning with determination. A fire blazed in her chest. This time, she would not lose. One late afternoon, as Clara was reviewing files, Hannah placed a freshly printed newspaper on her desk. The bold headline read, Knight Group officially enters South Bay bidding. CEO Peter Knight declares, we will turn this place into a world-class luxury paradise. Beneath the text was Peter's photo, a flawless gray suit, a calm face, sharp eyes staring straight into the camera. Clara's grip tightened on the paper, her jaw clenching. A world-class luxury paradise, she muttered bitterly. All he cares about is profit. But me, I want South Bay to belong to its people, and I'll show him there are values money can't buy. That evening, Clara sat alone in her modest rented apartment. It wasn't luxurious, just a few basic pieces of furniture, an old bookshelf, and a handful of family photos she had managed to keep. She poured herself a cheap glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the rain. For a fleeting moment, fear crept in. Could a tiny firm like hers really stand a chance against the giant Knight Group? If she lost again, could she bear it? She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, as if to steady her heart, I have to try. If not, I'll spend the rest of my life in his shadow. On the day the official bidding list was announced, The conference hall was filled with representatives from both large and small firms. Clara wore a simple gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, her face lightly made up. Sitting with Hannah and two colleagues, her heart pounded as the organizers read out each company name. Knight Group. The room erupted in murmurs, many eyes glancing with admiration toward the row where Peter sat. Clara gripped her pen tightly. When her own company's name was finally called, she took a deep breath and lifted her chin. At that exact moment, her eyes locked with Peter's. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smile flickering across his lips, as if he had known all along she wouldn't miss this. Clara's fist tightened as she whispered in her heart, "Yes, I'll face you, and this time, I won't fall." The conference room of the City Development Department gleamed under bright lights, tall white curtains drawn high to reveal the sweeping view of South Bay's coastline in the distance. Today, all the companies selected for the official presentation round of the Coastal Resort project had gathered. The atmosphere was tense, like a battlefield. Representatives, sharply dressed and holding thick folders, were ready to compete not only with ideas but with credibility and stature. Clara sat with her team in the waiting row, her palms slick with sweat. Across the room, Peter Knight entered, tall, imposing, his tailored suit flawless. Even the smallest nod from him was enough to stir the entire hall. "Your rival just arrived," Hannah whispered beside her. Clara didn't look, only replied firmly, "So what if he's my rival?" "I'm not backing down this time." When her company's name was called, Clara rose and walked to the podium. The projector lit up, displaying her team's renderings, a seaside resort that was modern yet harmonized with its natural surroundings. Her voice rang out, clear and steady. "South Bay is not just a strip of coastal land. It is home to thousands of fishermen, the legacy of communities who have lived here for generations. Our proposal is not just about building a resort, but creating a sustainable space where tourists can enjoy themselves while locals continue to live and preserve their culture." She emphasized the highlights: solar energy, partnerships with fishermen for cultural tours, and a coral reef conservation area to protect the marine ecosystem. Eyes across the room fixed on her. A few council members even nodded. Clara felt her heart steady, every word beating in rhythm with her determination. But then, as her presentation came to an end, Peter stood. He hadn't been invited to the counter, but with Knight Group's weight, the council allowed it. "Miss Walsh's proposal is admirable," Peter began in a calm tone. "But—" He paused as the screen behind him switched to massive financial charts. "Here is Knight Group's financial analysis. With 10 times the investment Miss Walsh proposes, we can deliver exponentially higher revenue to the city and create thousands of jobs within the first 2 years. International tourism demands world-class standards, and South Bay deserves to be a global 5-star destination." His voice was measured but heavy, like a hammer striking down. Detailed figures, dazzling graphs, everything meticulously prepared. Clara clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay composed. When the council glanced her way, she spoke up. "High profits are not wrong, but where do those profits come from? If we destroy the coastline, erase the fishing villages, and turn South Bay into concrete blocks, what will we have left in 20 years? Sustainability isn't just a trend, it's survival." The hall rippled with murmurs. Peter raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, as though daring her. "Let's see if you can keep standing." After the presentations, the media wasted no time. The front page of the Financial Herald blared, "Young businesswoman challenges real estate tycoon at South Bay." The article described Clara Walsh as a bold new face and drew a direct comparison to shark Peter Knight. Clara held the paper, trembling yet proud. She hadn't won, but at least she had forced the public to notice. That afternoon, as Clara left the building, she happened to cross paths with Peter. Their eyes met. "Your idea, not bad," he said first. Clara tightened her grip on her bag, replying quietly, "I don't need your compliments." Peter chuckled, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Too bad. Ideas need money to come alive, and that's exactly what you lack." Clara froze, a sharp pang in her chest, but she didn't show it. She lifted her chin. "You're right. I don't have hundreds of millions like you, but I have something you can't buy, the trust of the people." With that, she walked away, leaving Peter standing there with a faint, unreadable smile at his lips. That evening, Clara returned to the office where her team was gathered around simple takeout boxes. They looked at her with hopeful eyes. "We did great, Clara," one colleague said. "Even if we don't win now, the press is already talking about us." Clara gave a weary smile, but her heart brimmed with determination. She knew limited funds put her firm at a disadvantage, but her resolve and vision had already planted a seed, and she would not let Peter Knight or anyone else crush it. The sea breeze carried a salty tang into the city. Late in the afternoon, Clara stood at the foot of the glass tower of the development department to submit a technical addendum for the South Bay bid. The third-floor corridor stretched endlessly, lined with teal carpet, downlights casting soft golden glows over framed photographs of the city's harbor history. Hannah was tied up in a meeting with the solar contractor, so Clara came alone, clutching the folder to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The elevator doors opened with a dry ding. Clara stepped inside, then froze. In the lobby corner, near the coffee machine, she saw Lucas, Peter's close aide, leaning against the window, phone pressed to his ear. The slant of the late sun revealed the tension in his face. Clara's instinct told her to keep walking, but a few words caught her and held her still. "No, stop writing about it in emails. The Hale affair was loud enough already. And to be clear, Knight Group didn't push Walsh and Company into bankruptcy. Hale triggered the material adverse change clause first, cutting off their credit line. We only," Lucas lowered his voice, as if afraid the walls had ears, "only finished the game by the rules." Hale. The name struck Clara like metal scraping glass. Victor Hale, the family's former strategic partner, the man her father once called a brother. He had joined their plan to develop the Riverside complex until it all collapsed like a vanishing trick. Banks pulled out, contractors walked away, investors demanded refunds. In Clara's memory, the final image was the boardroom door swinging open, Peter Knight walking out cold-faced and victorious, while her father sank into a chair in despair. Clara's throat went dry. She pressed herself into an alcove by the emergency stairwell, heart pounding to the point of breaking. Yes, Lucas continued. Peter knew Hale was negotiating with the banks until the last minute. But that wasn't our move. At the time, Knight only presented an alternative plan, guaranteeing creditors' repayment and keeping the project alive. It was the best option for the city back then, he sighed. We took the blame, fine. But if Hale hadn't pulled the liquidity plug, Walsh and Company wouldn't have collapsed. A pause, Lucas shifted the phone to the other ear, voice lower still. I know, the media only sees the one who made the final strike. But inside, you know too, Peter didn't start that fight. Clara had heard enough. Her fingers dug so hard into the folder's edge, they turned white. From the shadows, she slipped into the stairwell, only daring to breathe once the steel door closed, her heartbeat echoing in the narrow space. He didn't start it? Hale pulled the plug first? Peter only finished it? The questions clashed in her head like waves against a breakwater. For 3 years, the name Peter Knight had meant destroyer, those gray eyes seeing her only as a problem to be solved. And Hale, the man who sat beside her father in countless meetings, who called her niece, suddenly shattered out of his safe pedestal in her mind. Clara re-entered the corridor. Lucas was gone. At a distance, another ding. The elevator doors opened, and out stepped Peter. He paused briefly when he saw her. Still the sharp suit, the neat tie, the calm aura of a man who controlled both breath and headlines. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, just enough for Clara to see something hesitate there, like a greeting unsaid. Miss Walsh, Peter said first, polite, neither warm nor cold. Clara's reflex shield rose. Knight. He gave a slight nod and walked past. Only then did Clara notice her own fingers trembling. She wanted to hurl the questions at him. What did Hale do? You knew, but stayed silent? But the words stuck in her throat. She had nothing but a fragment of overheard truth, and her pride refused to let her expose her confusion in front of him. Peter had gone several steps when he stopped and half-turned. Your technical addendum. If you explain the mechanics of the wastewater recycling system clearly, the council will like it. His tone was cool and objective. Clara gave a slight nod without thanks. As he walked away, the faint scent of sandalwood trailed, an aroma she had tried to hate, yet now stirred something oddly familiar. That night, Clara's small office glowed far later than usual. Hannah brought in 2 coffees and set them beside the humming printer. "I thought you'd gone home." "Not yet." Clara opened her laptop, dragging up an old folder labeled Riverside. Scanned invoices, meeting minutes, email exchanges, all buried long ago like relics. Each time she opened them, her chest ached. Hannah pulled up a chair, studying her. "What's going on?" Clara hesitated, then spoke slowly. Hannah was her right hand, the friend who had watched her scrape every cent to rebuild. "I just overheard Lucas," he said. Hale triggered the material adverse clause. Cut credit first. Knight only ended the match. Hannah set her cup down so gently it barely made a sound. "Clara." "I know," Clara exhaled. "Eavesdropping is bad. And maybe he said it to soften Knight's image. But..." She opened a 4-year-old meeting memo, cursor hovering over a tiny note at the bottom. Appendix 3. Disbursement conditional upon financial safety ratios proposed by partner Hale. Her eyes darkened. "Whose idea was that appendix?" "Hale's," Hannah answered without hesitation. "He insisted it would ensure flexibility." "And then the bank pulled out," Clara pressed, "because of increased risk after a minor investor withdrew." Hannah paused. "And Clara, that investor was one of Hale's satellite companies." The room seemed to shrink. Loose pieces suddenly clicked together. The conditional appendix, the minor investor withdrawing at the exact moment, the bank freezing funds, the site shutting down, and Knight entering like a bulldozer, clearing the rubble. "Maybe Knight knew," Hannah said softly. "But it doesn't mean he pulled the strings." She looked Clara straight in the eye. "The question is, how far do you want the truth? If you dig, it won't stay as simple as hating Knight." Clara pressed her forehead to her fingers, eyes locked on the screen. A vision of her father flashed, sitting by the window in his final days, hands trembling around a teacup, telling her not to let hatred consume her. Yet she had followed it for 3 years, funneled every reason into a single name, Peter Knight. If the truth pointed elsewhere, did she dare look? "I dare," she whispered, unsure if she spoke to Hannah or herself. "But I won't show weakness in front of him." "Not yet." Hannah nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we go another route. Investigate Hale. Start with public records, including business registrations, linked companies, and investment chains, before proceeding to Riverside. We can ask Ben at City Ledger to trace a few leads." Clara drew a deep breath. "Yes. I want the truth. Not for him, for me." They split tasks. Hannah drafted a list of documents, and Ben was contacted through a mutual acquaintance at the paper. Clara reopened every archived email, every line of minutes, hunting for loose threads. Close to midnight, Hannah left. The office fell silent, with only the hum of the AC and the yellow lamp. Clara opened an old email with an innocuous subject line. "Payment schedule adjustment. Draft. Sent by Hale's assistant." At the bottom, instead of the usual signature, a scribbled note. "To be reviewed later by internal audit. The date is 1 week before the bank cuts off funding." Clara leaned back in her chair, blinking slowly. A strange sorrow rose. Not pure anger, but a second kind of loss. The loss of certainty, of believing she had been right to hate one man. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Ben from City Ledger. Hannah gave me your contact. About Hale, I found some interesting files. Meet tomorrow?" Clara typed back. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Harbor and Pine Cafe." "Thanks." She set her phone down and looked out the window. The city slept, but the sea kept breathing, waves white and faint as pages turning. She closed her eyes. Behind her lids, Peter's gray eyes surfaced. Not fully cold, not warm either, but like deep water concealing its own tides. If he hadn't started the fight, then who was Peter Knight in her story? The question lay still, unanswered. Clara turned off the lamp. Tomorrow she would chase the real arrow that had pierced her family, and if she discovered her hatred had been misdirected, she would have to learn how to stand tall, even when the truth hurt. Outside the glass, harbor lights blinked like Morse code from afar. Clara whispered, as if promising herself, truth first, forgiveness later. The forecast had warned of scattered showers, but by noon the sky collapsed as if someone had pulled a gray curtain across South Bay. Sea winds screamed through the casuarina trees, whipping sand against car windows. Clara slowed down, the wipers swiping frantically but still unable to keep up. On the passenger seat lay survey maps and a few sand samples Hannah had prepared. Clara was headed to check the drainage outlets in the southern village. Just a minor detail, but crucial for her sustainable proposal. A text from Hannah flashed before disappearing as the signal dropped. If the rain gets too heavy, turn back. Don't risk it. Clara pressed her lips together. She was more familiar with life's sudden storms than with weather. But staring at the pitch-black sky, even she hesitated. Her decision was cut short by a flashing red warning light at the end of the coastal road. Temporary closure due to a tropical depression making landfall. Police waved cars back toward the nearest town, Seabrook. Clara turned the wheel, her tires skimming over long streaks of water like ink stains. Seabrook was just a small town 15 minutes inland from the site. Dark wooden rooftops hunched together, old shop signs creaking in the wind. On the corner stood a two-story inn, Mariner's Rest, with a green tin roof and 3 rocking chairs on its porch. She pulled in, braking hard under the awning. The salty wind slapped her face as soon as she opened the door, soaking her coat in seconds. Clutching her file, Clara dashed up the steps. Inside, behind the front desk, an elderly woman with silver hair and reading glasses strained to hear a crackling radio. "You need a room?" the woman rasped. "Yes, 1 room. Just for tonight, I think." The old woman nodded, handing her a pen. "Power's been out for half an hour. Lucky the fireplace is still running. Storm's a bad one tonight." Clara signed and paid cash. Just as the key changed hands, the door swung open again. Wind rushed in, carrying rain, and a faint scent of sandalwood. Peter stood in the doorway, hair damp, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jacket draped over one arm. His eyes flicked past Clara for a brief second before resting politely on the woman. "Any rooms left, ma'am?" Clara froze. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "Lucky you, 1 room left," the woman said, glancing out at the downpour. "Everyone's stopping here tonight." Peter nodded, paid, and accepted the key. He turned to Clara. "South Bay Road's closed. I was checking the dock at Seabrook and got stuck." "What a coincidence," Clara said flatly. The woman pointed toward a dim hallway. "No power. The emergency lights will guide you. Fireplace is on in the lounge. The kitchen is cooking fish stew for dinner. That'll have to do." The inn's lounge glowed warmly with the crackling fire. Flames cast long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. Clara sank into a worn armchair, carefully fanning her papers to dry without letting them get too close to the fire. Peter set his jacket on the chair opposite, disappeared into the side kitchen, and returned with 2 ceramic mugs. "Ginger tea," he said, offering her one. "The lady swears it'll keep us warm." "Thank you." Clara wrapped her hands around the mug, heat soaking into her frozen fingers. The sharp, sweet scent of ginger cut through the musty smell of damp clothes. Outside, the wind howled against the porch, windows rattling in their frames. Somewhere upstairs, a child giggled, then fell silent as thunder cracked. By the fire, the blaze leapt higher. Clara glanced at Peter. In the firelight, the hard edges of his face softened, his gray eyes less like blades and more like deep, unreadable water. "Are you always this calm?" she asked before realizing she'd spoken aloud. Peter sipped his tea. "I was trained to be." His gaze stayed on the fire, voice lowering as though speaking to himself. "My house was never noisy. Study schedules, extracurricular schedules, summer internships. Everything was a timeline. My father believed that if you don't accelerate, someone else will overtake you. I learned to count my breaths when it got too fast." "Count your breaths?" Clara tilted her head. "Yes." He gave the faintest smile. 7 in, 7 out. Numbers gave my mind structure. I carried that into the boardroom. When people shout, I count. When stocks crash, I count. When the press calls me cold, I still count. Old habits cling tight. Clara stayed quiet, startled by the softness of the admission. "And when you win, do you count then too?" Peter met her eyes. I do. Because victory is noisy. People cheer, laugh, and raise glasses. And then, suddenly, it's silence. Just a new burden, a new timeline. I measure that by rhythm, too. Clara propped her chin on her hand, watching a spark fizzle out in the hearth. Sounds lonely. Loneliness is a price some people choose to pay. He shrugged. I'm not always sure it's worth it. They both laughed lightly, uncertainly. Outside, the storm slammed rain against the windows. The fire sputtered, flames dipping. Peter rose, went to the log pile, and knelt to feed the blaze. His movements practiced. The desk lady peeked in. You handle a fire well, young man. Peter inclined his head politely, then returned to his seat, coaxing the flames back. And you? He asked after a moment's pause. Came to Seabrook to check drains? Alone? Yes. Clara smiled faintly. We don't have a big technical team. If Hannah's busy, I'll go myself. I need to see how the water flows, where the seawall breaks, and which homes are low-lying. You can ask for more funding, but field data, you have to gather that with your own eyes. Peter tilted his head. That's what I envy. I usually only see reports. Clara sipped her tea, warmth spreading. She thought of her father, his trembling hand holding hers in the antiseptic hallways of the hospital. He taught me to visit construction sites every week, she said softly. He said drawings are intentions. The site is true. When he lost the company, he lost his truth. Since then, I need to touch soil, smell mortar, stand in the wind. Peter was silent. At last he murmured, I'm sorry for him. Clara nodded. The pain is no longer raw, but still glowing like embers under ash. Some days I think I hated you more for that than for anything else. I know. He didn't argue, didn't defend. I was the face they saw when the boardroom door opened. I never tried to soften it. Maybe that's why every arrow came my way. And you just stood there? Clara asked. Most of the time. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the flames. Sometimes I deserved them. I was cold. I chose the shortest line between 2 points, even if it cut through people. Clara studied him, surprised by his bluntness. She wanted to spill about Lucas, about Hale, about the shady clauses, but this wasn't the night. Not here, with a storm outside, a fire glowing, and 2 mugs of ginger tea steaming between them. The truth could wait until morning. Tonight, all she could offer was her own truth. I'm not innocent either, she whispered. I dumped everything on one name because it was easier. Hatred makes the world tidy, but it blinds you too. Peter turned, half the ice gone from his gaze. If there's anything I can do to repair what can still be repaired. Don't promise what you can't hold, Clara cut in, not harsh, just firm. What I need is a fair chance at South Bay. The past, I'll uncover myself. He nodded, accepting the boundary she drew. Fair, he repeated. I'll try to make the game fairer this time. A warm silence lingered. The wind battered the roof while the fireplace breathed softly. A crooked wall clock ticked a beat off. You're cold, Peter said at last, almost a whisper. He slipped off his light coat and handed it to her. Keep it, at least until you're back in your room. Clara meant to refuse, but her hands accepted instinctively. The damp fabric, laced with rain and faint sandalwood, draped over her shoulders. Always the coat, she said, half teasing. My kinder gestures seem limited, he replied, the corner of his mouth quirking. She laughed, a small sound that surprised even her. It faded into the storm's roar, leaving behind a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. In that silence, Clara noticed her heartbeat slowing, steadying, not by counting, but by firelight, ginger tea, and the strange presence of the man she wanted to avoid yet couldn't look away from. Night deepened. The old woman brought 2 steaming bowls of fish stew, scented with dill. They ate, talking idly about harbor cafes, about a boy from the fishing village who built boats from cans. Once, when Clara reached for the salt, their fingertips brushed against each other. A static spark ran up her arm. Both pulled back quickly, like children caught crossing a chalk line. Later, the storm still raged. The woman handed them candles, guiding the way down the dark hallway. At Clara's door, they stopped, facing each other in the soft glow of her candle. Good night, Miss Walsh, Peter said, voice low, as if not to wake the storm. Good night, Knight. She hesitated, then added, and thank you for the tea and the fire. She gestured toward the lounge and gave a small shrug. He nodded, something rare flickering in his eyes. Strange thing to say, but maybe fate likes to arrive late, in the rain. Clara smiled, shaking her head. Don't blame fate. She pushed the door open, then paused. Or blame it halfway. The door closed, leaving the hallway to the storm's growl. Clara leaned against it for a long moment, Peter's coat still heavy on her shoulders, sandalwood and rain mingling. She shut her eyes, letting the warmth spread, just far enough to feel, but close enough to remember it was dangerous to forget distance. Tomorrow the storm would pass. Roads would reopen. She would meet Ben and open the files that might change the direction of an arrow from the past. But tonight, the fire still burned in the lounge, and somewhere behind the ice of one man, Clara had glimpsed a spark. Not forgiveness, just a crack wide enough for warmth to breathe. By morning, the storm had vanished as if someone had yanked a thread straight out of the sky. The gray clouds unraveled, leaving thin silver beams glinting across the green tin roof of Mariner's Rest. Rainwater dripped steadily from the eaves. In the distance, seagulls called in broken bursts. Clara opened her door. The room still smelled faintly of damp wood and laundry soap. Peter's coat sat neatly on the back of a chair, drier than it had been last night. She slipped on her own jacket, folded his into a precise rectangle, and stepped into the dim hallway where morning light touched her face. Warm, unexpectedly gentle. Peter was already in the lobby, speaking with the elderly innkeeper about the road's reopening. His shirt was fresh, his tie loose, his posture straight yet less rigid. He turned at the sound of her steps. The road to South Bay's open again, he said, his voice lighter than usual. Police advised slowing at the wooden bridge. You all right? I'm fine, Clara replied. She handed him the coat. Thank you for last night. He accepted it, his gray eyes flicking briefly to hers. The kitchen has coffee. Can I get you a cup? She nodded. They sat at a small table by the window, coffee mingling with the faint scent of dill left over from last night's stew. Outside, water stains spread across the streets like dried ink. Last night, Peter began, then paused, weighing his words. Thank you for telling me about your father. Clara turned her cup, watching the ripples rise and settle. It's nothing. A thin silence stretched. Peter leaned back, gaze steady on the window frame. Clara, he said, cutting straight to the point this time, I don't want to be just your rival anymore. The words dropped onto the wooden table like a coin into water. Ripples spread, touching the rim of her cup. Clara looked up. His face held no arrogance, none of the sly confidence she'd seen in press conferences. Only a quiet seriousness, as if he were laying down an important contract without knowing if it would ever be signed. I know this is a terrible moment to say it, he went on, slow and steady. The project's still hot, the press is circling, and he drew in a breath, betraying that old habit of counting, then exhaled. But I don't want to pretend everything is just business anymore. I respect you in the boardroom. He faltered, searching for a word less bright than like, less final than love. I care. The word care landed softly, unexpectedly, not dazzling, but warm, like last night's fire. Clara's chest tightened. She'd imagined all kinds of things he might say, a clever quip, a neat metaphor, even some strategic move disguised as intimacy. But the simplicity of his words left her nothing to fight against. Last night, when he spoke of counting breaths, she had glimpsed a crack in the ice. Now that the crack had widened just enough for light to slip through. But then came the shadow, memories of the old boardroom, her father, Riverside, the material adverse change clause, Hale's assistant's email, and Peter's cold figure at the door, the period at the end of everything, and the overheard conversation yesterday, fragments still unaligned. Peter, she whispered, I can't trust a man who once stood as the reason my family lost everything. He didn't flinch. He didn't defend. He simply received it. A flicker of regret passed through his eyes like a cloud. I understand. He leaned back, hands lacing together. I don't expect you to forget in a single stormy night. I just wanted you to know where I stand. A faint smile, more self-mocking than protective, touched his lips. And to let you know, if you need a straight line, I'll try to bend. Clara gave a dry laugh. Straight lines don't bend. Then I'll redraw the points, he answered instantly, as though the words had been waiting, or learn to walk the curve. The reply unsettled her. Peter Knight had always been the straightest, shortest line between 2 points. Efficient, ruthless, unyielding. To hear him talk about walking curves sounded absurdly tender. And that was dangerous. The tenderness of a dangerous man was doubly so. She set her cup down, fingers lacing together. We're bidding on the same project. The press is watching. I can't be the woman rumored to be in bed with the rival. I know, he said simply, no excuses. And I don't want you to be anyone's shadow either. A text lit up Clara's phone. From Ben, City Ledger. At Harbor and Pine. Got Hale's files. Can you come? Her heart skipped, then raced. The documents that might answer the questions she had buried for 3 years, waiting. She looked up. I have to go. She rose, tucking in her chair. This conversation... Thank you for the honesty. But I need the truth before I know what to do with all of this. She gestured between them. Peter stood as well, but didn't close the distance. The truth, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. All right. And... He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. While you're searching for it, I'll do my best to keep the game fair. Clara held his gaze for a beat. Fair, she echoed. And if I catch anything unfair, I'll give it back in kind. A thin smile. I believe you'd catch it faster than anyone. The innkeeper appeared, holding paper receipts and 2 room keys. Check out, dear, she said cheerfully. The storm had passed, pulling them both back onto their separate straight roads. The cafe at Harbor and Pine bustled more than usual after the storm, everyone craving warmth. Ben waved as soon as Clara entered, a brown briefcase resting on the table like a compact vault. Got something, he said, sliding out shareholder transfer records from a shell company, a strange name that, traced back, linked to Hale. The week before the bank cut the credit line, this company transferred holdings to an offshore trust. The money trail's messy, but the timing is exact. And here, an internal bank memo notes risk elevated due to ownership changes in Party B. Party B being Walsh and Company. Clara thanked him, fingertips trembling on the paper's edge. The pieces began to click. Not into a gentle picture, but into a dirty map. Peter's name was absent. He might have known. He might not. Either way, the arrow that pierced her family had launched from another bow. Ben sipped his coffee. I'll keep digging. But this is enough to say, it stinks. Clara nodded, drawing a deep breath. Thank you. When she stepped out, the wind carried a trace of salt and the scent of fresh waffles. She paused under the awning, gazing at a patch of sky now blue with streaks of gray. Peter's words from the morning echoed back. I don't want to be just your rival anymore. It wasn't a blazing symphony, but a single steady note that lingered. She knew she was moved, not by numbers or titles, but by the moments when he placed her dignity on the table, when he admitted to loneliness without theatrics, when he didn't scramble to defend himself even when given the chance. But feeling was one thing. Trust was another. Trust was a bridge that couldn't be built overnight. Her phone buzzed. Hannah, sent the revised wastewater system draft. Council responded well. Meeting at 2 p.m., Clara typed back, perfect. See you at the office. She pocketed the phone and stepped into the sunlight. At the end of the street, the wooden bridge was drying in the breeze. She would cross it, back to South Bay, back to the fight. Only now the fight carried an added weight. Not just to build a resort, but to rebuild the bridge of trust. With the past, with herself, and maybe with a man learning how to walk curves. By afternoon, they would face each other again, under white lights and cold slides. There she would be Clara Walsh, sharp, straightforward, unshaken by half a confession. But in the smallest corner of her heart, a seed had touched soil. It hadn't sprouted, hadn't been watered, and was still covered by coarse fabric called reason. Yet a seed was still a seed, only waiting for the weather. Clara lifted her chin to the breeze. Fair, she whispered to herself, like a vow. Then she walked on. Beyond the bridge, the sea was brightening. Beyond the bridge, Peter Knight was likely still counting his breaths, and for the first time, perhaps, counting them slower. Loving this story. This story belongs to Soul Stories. If you see it anywhere else, please come back to our official channel to enjoy it in full. The Grand Hall of the City Development Department was lit like a stage. This was the final bidding round for the South Bay project, and the air in the room was thick with tension. Dozens of cameras were pointed at the stage, and hundreds of eyes were locked on the competitors. Reporters crowded the back, shutters clicking nonstop. The project itself was already magnetic, but the real reason the public was buzzing was the clash of two names, Clara Walsh and Peter Knight. The two sworn rivals are now fighting head-to-head for South Bay. One journalist whispered excitedly to another, "This might be the hottest headline of the month." On the giant LED screen hanging above, the headline scrolled across, "Entwined in rivalry, young businesswoman challenges real estate tycoon in final round." Clara sat in the third row, gripping her file so tightly the paper edges left marks on her hands. She could feel every gaze fixed on her. Some saw her as reckless, others as a symbol of resilience rising from ruin. But none of them could see how fierce the battle inside her was. Across the aisle, Peter sat straight-backed, clad in a charcoal-tailored suit, his face unreadable, untouchable, like a steel wall standing between Clara and victory. She tried not to look his way, but his presence pulled at her anyway, her heart stumbling in its rhythm. When Clara's company was called, she rose, walked to the podium, her heels steady against the wooden floor. Her voice came through strong, and even on the microphone, as she laid out every detail: solar energy systems, closed-loop wastewater treatment, coral reef conservation, and partnerships with local fishermen for cultural tours. South Bay is not just a destination, it's a home, she concluded, sweeping the room with her gaze. We believe this project must bring economic growth while protecting the communities that have lived here for generations. A few council members nodded. Murmurs rippled behind her. Clara drew a deep breath, confidence filling her chest. But as soon as the applause began to fade, the MC's voice rang out. "Now the representative from Knight Group." Peter rose. He didn't need notes. His voice was calm, each number firing like bullets. 10 times the proposed investment, triple projected profits in the first year, thousands of direct and indirect jobs. Behind him, colorful charts painted a picture of inevitable victory. South Bay will become a 5-star paradise, Peter declared, drawing international travelers and placing this city firmly on the global tourism map. For us, this is not only about profit, it's about prestige for the entire city. The council reacted with audible approval, heads nodding firmly. Reporters burst into applause. Clara bit her lip, chest tightening. Her proposal carried heart, but his had money, power, and a voice people trusted without needing proof. During the break, the press swarmed her. Flashbulbs strobed, microphones shoved in her face. "Miss Walsh, how does it feel to face Mr. Knight head on? Do you really think you have a chance? There are rumors you and Mr. Knight have a personal relationship. Does that affect the outcome?" Clara drew in a breath and smiled calmly. "I'm here for South Bay and for my vision. Everything I've done has been transparent. Fair competition is all I ask for." The room hushed for a moment, then erupted again. From across the crowd, Peter's gray eyes caught hers. He lifted a brow, as if to say something, then turned away. That night, Clara sat in her office scrolling through headlines. From rivals to romance, business enemies clash over South Bay. Walsh versus Knight, competition or love story. She shut the laptop and tossed her phone on the desk. Her mind spun. She was torn between the feelings sparked that stormy night in Seabrook and the career she had poured her heart and soul into. If she backed down, she would admit she was small. If she let her heart soften, she risked the company, her sweat, her tears, her father's memory. A knock at the door. Peter stood there unannounced, no longer the polished CEO on stage, but just a man under the yellow glow of her desk lamp. "You did well today," he said, his voice even. Clara clenched her fists. "Don't pretend you care. We're rivals." "Yes, rivals." He stepped closer, his gaze sharp yet warm. But Clara, love and rivalry don't cancel each other out. They can coexist. They can make us stronger. Her heart pounded. Even as her reason screamed not to believe him, his words touched a place she'd kept locked away. "You're saying this to throw me off guard?" she asked, half mocking, half shaken. Peter shook his head. "I'm saying it because it's what I believe." A heavy silence filled the room. Clara turned away, afraid that if she looked longer, she'd fall into his arms. The next morning, a bombshell dropped. The city's biggest financial paper blasted the headline, "Global conglomerate Helios Capital offers to acquire entire South Bay project." The council immediately called for an emergency session. Helios was a foreign giant, its capital dwarfing that of the Knight Group. If accepted, Clara and Peter's sleepless nights, their proposals, their battles, it would all be erased. Clara's hands trembled around the newspaper. Two feelings collided inside her: fear of losing everything, and a strange flicker of relief. At least her war with Peter was no longer the only shadow. But when she looked up, she met his gaze. For the first time, she saw undisguised worry in those gray eyes. Peter spoke softly, just for her. "This time, maybe we're not rivals anymore." The news of Helios Capital hit like a tsunami, sweeping away months of preparation from every bidding company. The press called them the foreign giant, and analysts agreed. Once Helios stepped in, no domestic firm stood a chance. Clara sat in her small office, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. Hannah read the article on her laptop, her voice sinking. "Helios is offering double Knight Group's capital. If the council favors safety, we're finished." Clara stayed silent. She had fought too long to stop here. But the reality was so brutal that even her ironclad resolve began to crack. A knock at the door. When it opened, Peter appeared. He wasn't in his usual sharp suit, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. In that moment, he didn't look like the untouchable real estate tycoon, but like a man searching for an ally. "We need to talk," he said. They met at a small seaside cafe, windows opening straight to the crashing waves. Clara sat opposite, fingers interlaced. Peter slid a folder across the table. "Helios has the money, but they're outsiders. They'll strip the profits and leave behind a concrete shore." His gray eyes locked on hers. "If you want South Bay to keep its soul, we have to work together." Clara gave a dry laugh. "You think I'll just shake hands with you?" Peter didn't argue, only nodded slightly. "I know you hate me. Maybe you're right too, but this time, the real enemy isn't us. If we keep fighting each other, we both lose. Helios wins." Her chest surged with conflict. Logic told her he was right. Her heart trembled at the strange sincerity in his gaze. "Just this once," she said softly, as if setting a condition. "Just this once," he confirmed, a thin smile curving his lips. From that day, Clara's tiny office became a shared war room. Documents piled high, laptop screens glowed deep into the night. Clara typed reports while Peter stood behind her, pointing out figures. Late at night, Hannah started to pour coffee, but Peter took the pot. "Let me." He set a hot cup in front of Clara, with a spoonful of sugar, just the way she liked it. She looked up, surprised. "When did you notice?" "At the wedding," he said lightly. "You sipped once and winced." "I guessed it needed sweetening." Clara laughed, the sound tumbling into the midnight fatigue, washing some of it away. Another night, Clara fell asleep at her desk, exhausted. When she woke, Peter's coat was draped over her shoulders, and her laptop was closed. A handwritten note lay beside her. "Rest a little, then keep going. E." Her fingers brushed the hurried signature, and her heart softened unexpectedly. For the first time, she saw that within his hardness was a silent emptiness, like her own. The days of working together blurred into strange moments, sitting side by side, adjusting slides, shoulders brushing. Once, when Clara reached for a file, her hand brushed his. Both startled, then laughed. The laughter was light as surf, yet left behind a sweetness. At night, after the others had gone home, they walked the shoreline. Clara spoke of her dream to build resorts tied to communities. Peter told her of the pressure of his youth, how he had always had to run faster than everyone else to prove his worth. "Did you ever think of stopping?" Clara asked. Peter gazed out to sea. "Never. Not until I met you." Her heart fluttered. The sea breeze carried its salt, and they fell into silence. Not heavy anymore, but gentle. So gentle, neither wanted to break it. When the council convened to review proposals, Clara and Peter walked into the room together. For the first time, they didn't sit across from each other, but side by side. Their joint plan, blending Clara's sustainable vision with Night Group's resources, left the room surprised. Miss Walsh and Mr. Knight, a partnership? One council member raised a brow. We are different, Clara said firmly, but South Bay needs both, sustainability and resources. We've chosen to be stronger together. Her eyes flicked to Peter. His gaze met hers, no longer steel, but warm as glowing embers. That night, after leaving the meeting, they stood on the hotel rooftop overlooking the sea. The city shone bright, but the distant shore was still dark, waiting. See? Peter said quietly. When we're side by side, everything is clearer. Clara looked up at him. She wanted to deny it, to keep her walls up, but her heart admitted it. Yes, they were strongest together. The wind blew, tousling her hair. Peter gently tucked a stray lock behind her ear, slow and tender. Clara didn't pull away. In that moment, she understood. Hatred no longer filled her heart completely. Something warmer had begun to take root. The sea wind howled outside the window, carrying the sharp scent of salt. It was late at night, and Clara's small office glowed with light. On the desk, old files were scattered among fresh notes. She had been sitting there for hours, her eyes red, forcing herself to swallow every word as though each one were shards of glass cutting into her. These were the documents Ben from City Ledger had dug up after days of searching. Inside them, spelled out in cold detail, was proof that her father, Mr. Walsh, had signed a supplemental contract, mortgaging the company's assets to guarantee a reckless loan. That single signature had opened the door for Hale, the so-called trusted partner, to exploit, pull out his capital, and push the company over the cliff. Clara pressed her hand to the page bearing her father's familiar signature. Her vision blurred. Dad, why did you do it? The office door opened softly. Peter stepped inside unannounced. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of suits, just a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled back, the top 2 buttons undone. He looked less like a titan and more like himself. You're still here, he said, voice low but gentle. I figured. Clara didn't look up. You knew all along, didn't you? Peter was silent for a few beats, then stepped closer. Yes, I knew. The words stabbed her heart. She clutched the file, a bitter smile curving her lips. For 3 years, I hated you. I blamed you for everything. I thought you destroyed my family. But the truth? Peter sat beside her, speaking in a slow, deliberate manner. The truth is, your father was human. Anyone can make mistakes. He loved the company too much and wanted to save it at any cost. And Hale took advantage of that trust. You knew, Clara whispered, so why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let me hate you for all these years? Peter lowered his gaze. Because telling you wouldn't have eased the pain. You had just lost your father and your company. I didn't want you to carry another weight. That the man you loved most was also the reason. I thought, letting you hate me would be easier than letting you lose him twice. Clara turned to him, tears spilling unchecked. All these years she had built a fortress of hatred around a man who hadn't truly deserved it. All the sleepless nights, the harsh words she'd hurled at Peter, suddenly they shattered like glass. You let me hate the wrong person, she choked out. You stayed silent. Let me drown in the dark. Do you know how many nights I wished I could scream at you? Why did you do this to me? Now I realize you chose silence so I could keep one last good memory of my father. Peter lifted his eyes to hers. In that gray gaze there was no coldness, only a grief he could no longer hide. If I had the choice again, I'd stay silent again. Because you matter more than my pride. The room fell quiet, filled only with the sound of distant waves and the ticking clock. Clara sobbed softly, letting the file slip from her hand. 3 years. I hated the wrong man, she whispered. Peter reached out, drawing her gently into his arms. His embrace was strong yet tender, as though peeling away every thorn she had wrapped around herself. Clara let herself lean against him, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure against her ear. "Maybe fate didn't take everything," Peter murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. "It left you, me." Tears streamed from Clara's eyes, but now not only from pain. In his arms, she felt both loss and hope. A cruel truth had been revealed. Yet in the same moment, she realized her heart no longer refused him. Peter held her tighter, as though engraving a promise into every breath. "I can't give you back the past, but I'll walk with you into the future." Clara closed her eyes, letting the tears flow. Within her, a seed stirred, no longer buried under hatred, but watered by truth and the fragile beginnings of trust. Outside the window, dawn painted the sea in hues of rose. And for Clara, it wasn't just another morning. It was the beginning of something real. The press room at the City Development Department was packed to the brim. Camera flashes fired nonstop, the hum of voices swelling like waves. The final results had just been announced. The council officially awarded the South Bay project to the Walsh Consulting Knight Group Alliance, not to Helios Capital. The news swept through the city like a reverse storm. Reporters rushed to send breaking headlines. Foreign giant defeated by unlikely alliance of longtime rivals. Some outlets went further. Rivalry becomes strength. South Bay has its winners. Clara sat at the conference table, her heart still trembling faintly. As applause thundered across the room, she had to draw a long, steady breath to believe it was real. All the sleepless nights, all the scars of the past, all the doubts about herself, answered now in 2 words: victory. Beside her, Peter sat straight-backed, his face calm as ever. Yet his hand tapped lightly on the table, a tiny rhythm betraying that for him, too, this wasn't just a business win. It was one of those rare moments when he allowed himself to exhale. When the host invited the representatives to speak, Peter rose first. Microphone in hand, his voice rang steady and sure. South Bay is a golden opportunity, but it is also a test of trust. Trust that sustainability can stand beside profitability. Miss Walsh and I chose to build this project together because we believe in a future where the shore still has a soul and the people here still have a home. He paused, then, unexpectedly, turned to Clara, extending his hand. The flashes exploded. Every lens in the room swung toward them. Clara froze for a beat, her heart leaping to her throat. But those gray eyes met hers, not commanding, not pressuring, simply inviting, trusting. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His warm grip tightened, a promise without words. The press room erupted in cheers. Within minutes, a news site splashed the headline, "South Bay secured, the city's new power couple." When it was her turn, Clara stepped up to the podium. The microphone was cool, but her voice came strong and unwavering. "I used to think rivals could only try to destroy each other, but South Bay proved the opposite. When you combine different strengths, you can create something greater." Maybe, she turned toward Peter, her eyes glimmering with gentleness. Maybe we were meant to both fight against each other and belong to each other. Applause burst like crashing waves. This time, Peter didn't hide his smile, a rare, genuine smile. After the press conference, they slipped out of the building, away from the crowd of reporters still jostling at the door. The South Bay evening was drenched in gold, the sea shimmering like sheets of silver. Clara exhaled, relieved, but her hand was still in Peter's, neither of them letting go. "You just made me say the most romantic line of my life in front of hundreds of cameras," she teased, cheeks flushing. "You spoke from your heart," he said, his voice low but his lips tilting with the faintest grin. "And I'm proud I was there to hear it." She laughed, light and free, like the sea breeze itself. Together they walked on, shoulders brushing, 2 people who, after years of detours, had finally found their rhythm side by side. That night, headlines everywhere blazed with images. Clara and Peter, hand in hand, standing together against the South Bay backdrop. The public referred to them as the power couple, but to Clara, it was more than a label. It was the truth she had just touched. She and Peter were strongest not just in business, but in love. A year slipped by as swiftly as the sea breeze. South Bay was no longer an untouched stretch of land waiting to be claimed, but had transformed into a model resort. Eco-friendly wooden lodges nestled among rows of casuarina trees, solar panels glistened on rooftops, and the coral sanctuary beneath the clear waters drew hundreds of volunteers and visitors. The local people still lived in the same places their families had for generations. Children played on the sand, and seafood stalls lined the beach as always. However, many families also worked as guides for fishing village tours, proudly sharing their culture with visitors. The project was hailed by the press as the sustainable development icon of the decade. In every article, images of Clara and Peter appeared side by side, not as rivals anymore, but as partners, and more than that, as lovers bound by fate itself. That afternoon, South Bay glowed beneath the sunset. On the beach, a small wedding was being prepared. There were no extravagant decorations, only white veils fluttering in the wind, wooden chairs neatly arranged, and an aisle paved with gleaming seashells. Clara wore a pure white gown, simple but elegant, the train brushing the soft sand. Her hair flowed freely, crowned with a wreath of wildflowers. She stood beneath an arch of paper blossoms, the evening light sparkling in her eyes. Peter walked toward her from the other side. His sand-colored suit fit perfectly, his tie understated. No longer the cold CEO, he was simply a man smiling at the woman he had chosen for life. When his hand touched hers, they looked into each other's eyes, and in that gaze they saw the whole journey, the humiliating wedding of another, the tense bidding wars, the storm in Seabrook, the night by the fire, the moment the truth was revealed. All the hatred and struggle had become stepping stones leading them here. The ceremony was simple. Only family, close friends, and colleagues who had stood with them through the project were present. The waves lapped softly like music, and the breeze carried blessings. As the priest finished, Peter leaned close, his warm, familiar voice brushing her ear, making her heart tremble. "Maybe it's fate we met again." Clara laughed through tears, whispering back so only he could hear, "And this time, I won't walk away." Their sweet kiss followed under a sky painted in rose, witnessed by loved ones in the eternal song of the sea. The small reception unfolded right on the beach. A long wooden table draped in white cloth, baskets of wildflowers, platters of sizzling fresh seafood. Clara clinked glasses with Hannah, her best friend, who had seen her through it all. Hannah's eyes sparkled as she smiled widely. "See? You finally won, both in business and in love." Clara squeezed her hand. "All I know is, I'm no longer alone." At a distance, Peter was laughing with a group of local fishermen, leaning down to listen to their stories. When he caught Clara's gaze, he lifted his glass toward her, his eyes brimming with warmth. She smiled back, her heart whispering, "Maybe this is the beginning I've been waiting for." Night fell, and strings of lights glowed across the beach like falling stars. Guests danced and laughed, their joy rising into the night air. Clara and Peter slipped away for a walk along the shoreline, waves brushing gently at their feet. "Do you remember the first time we met again?" Peter asked, his hand tightening around hers. "Of course," Clara chuckled. "You walked up and said that line, and I was furious but surprised. And now?" She tilted her head toward him, eyes soft. "Now I believe it. Maybe we really were meant to both clash and belong to each other." He stopped, pulling her closer. "If I had to choose again, I'd still want to meet you, even if it meant going through every storm all over." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat blend with the rhythm of the sea. "Me too." The waves kept rolling in, steady and endless, as if sealing their vows. Though their story had begun in hatred, though they once stood on opposite sides, in the end, they had found each other, not as victor and vanquished, but as two destined halves. In the hush of the night tide, Clara closed her eyes, peace spreading through her body, and she knew, from this moment, their story was only just beginning.